Good day. Welcome to the Strong Ambition Podcast. Your host, Rylan Qualley, once again. And today I have a guest talking about training and longevity with Don Moxley. So Don was a strength conditioning, exercise science professor himself at Ohio State, and he has an amazing record working with so many high quality championship athletes and even being a championship athlete himself in wrestling, an Olympic level athlete. So we dive into strength and conditioning. We talk about some really valuable things around what you need to know as a strength athlete. And then we also dive into where he's at now in life, talking about longevity. And he's gotten into some fascinating products. He talks about HRV and the importance of HRV. And then we dive into autophagy and a product for autophagy and spermidine. So we're going to talk about all these things. You'll understand what all that is about very shortly here. Without further ado, here is Don Moxley. All right, good day, Don. How are you today, sir?
I am well. I am in the Pacific Northwest. We're up in Northwest Washington right now. So it's a little rainy right now, but it's still a beautiful place.
Well, so just off air, you were explaining to me that you and your wife love to travel around an RV. I just love this, the nomad lifestyle. So how long you been doing that?
We moved into the rig Easter Sunday. It'll be 2 years ago this Easter. So we 15, 16, 17 months in now. In that time, we've traveled to 32 states. We've driven a little over 50,000 miles, gone back and forth across the United States 3 times. Yeah, it's been really interesting. Our daughter moved out of the house January 2nd a year ago. And I looked at my wife and I said, we're done. I said, she's gone. She's got a real job. She's not coming home. And we wanted to wake up and drink our coffee looking at mountains or looking at water. And at the time we lived in Central Ohio, and it's a great place to raise our family. But we wanted mountains in our life. So right now we're up in the Pacific Northwest, basically at the base of Mount Baker. And so we really like it here.
That's beautiful. And I just love chasing that kind of freedom lifestyle, like you say, and to be able to wake up with mountains. There's something so captivating about, standing in nature. It makes you feel small in a nice way. It takes your breath away, puts you in the moment quite beautifully.
Earlier this summer, we were down in Central Washington, and we would drive up out of our campsite. And when you drove out, you looked right down the throat of Mount St. Helens.
Wow.
And I'm old enough to remember when St. Helens blew back in 1980. And, I was a senior in high school that year. And it was, it's one thing to be on the other side of the country and see this, but then you see the massiveness of Mount Rainier and Mount Baker and Mount Hood. And then you look at this hole in Mount St. Helens and you think to yourself, my God, look at the amount of energy it took to do that. It had to be just an incredible event.
Wow. Yeah. I commend you on this adventure into your later years. So
Pretty cool.
I'd love to hear the adventure before this because, I've just read a little bit of your backstory. I don't tell too much about your backstory because I want your story told by you. So how about you introduce yourself formally to the audience and just tell us kind of what you're known for, what you do.
So my background, I'm trained as an exercise physiologist. I grew up on a farm in Eastern Ohio, raising beef cattle, and had every intention of going home after university and continuing to raise beef cattle. We had a big operation. We had about 3,000 acres and about 1,000 head of cattle, and it was quite. Listen, it was a lot of work, but you start to look at the economics of farming, and we did not own the farm. We leased land, and every indication was you have to inherit land to make a farm profitable. So that was not it. And at the same time, I was a good enough wrestler that I walked on to the wrestling team at Ohio State. I used to cut a lot of weight. My first year, I cut from 220 to 177.
Oh.
Practiced 15 days, tore a knee up, had surgery on it, was basically done that year. Came back the next year. We had an All-American at 177, so I went 190, so I cut about from 230 to 190. Did twice as well that year. Practiced 30 days, tore the other knee up. And so I'd been in school for 2 years. Knew I wanted to wrestle, but hadn't quite, the academic thing hadn't taken hold yet. And I said, what's it take? And so, I was blessed with a group of mentors, one of which was a guy by the name of Louis Simmons, of
Wow.
Westside Barbell.
Wow.
So I had a roommate, I had a buddy's roommate, what had the third longest shot in the world at the time. His name was Kevin Akins. And Kevin says, you want to get strong? I'll show you where to go. So he takes me to Lou's garage.
Wow.
And at the same time, I had a wonderful professor, Dr. Bob Bartels, that was he was a coach of multiple Olympians in the 60s from Ohio State. And I was also working with a group out of that what became Hammer Strength. There was a thing in Cincinnati called Nautilus Midwest. So we had these wonderful influences of high intensity and powerlifting and other issues, which was just, it was incredible. So fell in love with that, finished my graduate degree in exercise phys. And within about 3 years, I'm working as a professor. So I've been a professor for about 35 years, teaching the exercise sciences. But while I've taught, I've always kept either a stable of athletes that I work with, fairly elite kids, or I've worked in the industry. I had the opportunity to work for Polar, the heart rate monitor company. So I worked for them for 8 years and I was on the windshield of all of the state-of-the-art development and wearable technology, kind of fell in love with that. So, recently, 15 through 18, I was a sports scientist at Ohio State. We had multiple All-Americans. We won a national title, but we learned how to use this thing called heart rate variability, HRV, and we could use it for prescription or for diagnosing problems or for selection. I knew who was going to be an All-American the first day of the national tournament based on HRV status. Left that, went to work in cannabis. Like every good scientist, you leave a university possession, go sell weed in South Florida. But I went to work in the medical cannabis business, learned about cannabinoids and the value there. And while I was there, I came across a guy that calls me one day, says, what are you doing? And he says, have you ever heard of the word autophagy? And I said, I have a passing understanding of it. He said, have you ever heard of this thing called spermidine? I said, nope, new one for me. Started to do some research on that, and I've been working with that company now for the last 3 years, doing this. I teach, what's it take to live longer? What's it take to live better? How's this stuff going hand in hand? And it just goes, it works perfectly with my background.
Well, that is a really cool background. I love that. The lot to dig up there, because I love right from the great goal. So let's come back a little, because we're going to walk all the way through that, because there's a great story that you have there. I got to just say how pumped I am that you grew up on a farm, because I grew up on a farm. Now,
there you go.
With that being said, I also didn't grow up on a cattle farm. So I'll say, like, I got it easy. My dad was the hardest worker. I mean, I worked harder than some of my friends growing up, but for sure, cattle farming is so much harder. And I think that's tremendous. Just curious, how do you feel that influenced you as far as work ethic in your life?
Oh, I don't know if it's about work ethic. What you learn, though, Rylan, is that everything is achievable with work. There's times in life when it can be tough. Money can be tough. There can be issues going on. And listen, whatever you're doing is better than cleaning a barn. Mm-hmm. Whatever you're doing is better than digging ditches. But worst case scenario, I can clean barns and dig dishes. So I think the farm gave you the freedom to dream, I want to make this project. I need to make this work better. My role on the farm primarily was fixing things. We have when you got 1,000 head of cattle, all you do in the summer is you bale hay. All summer. And so we usually had a situation where we'd go out and mow hay in the morning. It would dry by the afternoon. You're baling in the afternoon. But in the first thing in the morning, I'm usually up fixing things, because you tear stuff up, working, and you're constantly tearing things up. Well, what you learn is that it's just a matter of putting things back together and figuring out, how do you make this work? So it's that problem solving that comes that is just a wonderful benefit.
That's a great attitude to take from it. The work, I mean, realistically, it is kind of work ethic, but not in the same kind of mindset that some people might imagine, oh, you just work hard and grind. It's like you just know you're capable of work. And I totally agree with that people will underestimate that.
And it's love. This is an important part. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we did a lot of work. Then I went on to wrestle in college and had a lot of success there. And again, my success didn't come from talent. My success came from the fact that I would just stay in the game. And again, you figured out figuring out how to make things work. I did it for myself. You know, back in the early 80s, strength and conditioning was not a huge thing. Right. It was they were kind of the freaks off to the side. Yeah. And I had to figure out what I had to do. And I was different than my teammates. I took a different path to strength and conditioning than what my team and my teammates did. Because for me to solve my equation for success, I had different variables I had to solve for. And this is what you learn. But you do the work because you love the work. You know, that's the important part is that you don't grind because you think society thinks you should grind or something. No, you do it because you love it. And that's what's critical to get out of this process.
Right there, that keyword process. That's something that I had to remind myself of recently. That's what's given me any success. And when I got into boxing, I got into training. It's because I actually love doing the shit that other people didn't. It's like I can show up for this because even though this is like the boring stuff, this is the stuff that people don't want to do. It's like I'm still excited to do it. I'm still like, I'm going to go in and I'm going to do the 12 rounds on the jump rope, heavy bag, and I'll lose myself in it. And I'll do that again and again. So like you say, it's the showing up in the capacity for like just showing up itself is rewarding. And that's so hard for people, right? So that's
you know, there's a good book about this. You know, I had a sports psychologist when I was in school, and he turned me on to a book that was called The Flow, The Psychology of the Optimum Experience. The author's Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Yeah, Dr. Csikszentmihalyi passed away about a year ago, but Stephen Kotler has kind of taken on the study of this, and Stephen and I have gotten to be friends over the years. But the point is, you would do the 12 rounds with the jump rope because you put yourself in flow. You put yourself in the zone, in the groove. You got rid of the distracted thinking. It was focused on the task at hand. There were clear goals and feedback. This is what good work does. Okay. Listen, digging a ditch is hard, but you know where the end point is. Okay. Yeah. You don't dig a ditch with an endless ditch. You know where the end, and you put in the process to get there. This is the big point. So, you know, doing things, and I consider Flow the most important book I ever read. Recommend it regularly. I teach the concept. And I think if you're struggling with something in your life, you know what, going back and looking at something like Flow, what is the thing that lets you turn off the outside, focus on the task at hand, develop a skill over time? This is a key part to success.
Couldn't agree more. And it's funny you say the whole idea of flow. So my best friend, Ray Lavoie, is actually now a professor studying flow, and he's in this realm. He's at El Paso, and he's now getting into, because it's a very other than the guys that you had named, not many people research this. And so they're researching it to try to put more objective measures in it. So it's super fascinating. But like you say, when you think about the quality of life, there's not a better, you know, state than flow. And what's really interesting is like you and I can go back and forth talking about it because, you know, you have had the passion, you've had an experience where like this got flow, like it was your wrestling, it was your work and all that. You can talk to people and they won't know what that means because they might not have experienced that passion and that because it's so hard to even actually do research on because some people don't know what that definition is. But I love that you really highlighted that, and it's really cool to know where your experiences came from. And that passion for wrestling, I'm really curious about is like how that evolved for you as an athlete, because that's exactly where I went with a lot of my boxing was I was so passionate, I wanted to be the best, and then I would just break down. I would just break down. And so, like, did you have a lot of experiences where you're like, I got to be able to do this better?
Ironically, what's interesting about this is that I started wrestling because I had an older brother that wrestled. Number one. Number two is we lived in a house that we lived in relative poverty, and our house that we lived in the wintertime, the water would freeze. So we did not have running water in our house for a couple months during the winter. Now, it's not like Winnipeg, but certainly it was, northern Ohio, central Ohio. And if I didn't wrestle, I didn't get a warm shower that day.
Oh,
okay.
goodness.
And the other thing about wrestling was in the summertime, we were working on the farm. There was not a summertime sport. The summertime sport was on the idiot end of a hay baler. So I wrestled because my brother wrestled. Then I started to experience some success, and there was a bit of sibling rivalry that drove the early part of this. But then you realize that there's a point in time when you realize wrestling isn't about being mean or wanting or things like that. It's about the willingness to sharpen the saw, the willingness to go into the room and drill and drill and drill and drill and drill and drill more than anybody else. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And when you learn that and you start to get some success from that, huge transition. Okay, huge transition. And then saw some early success in high school. I was a good enough wrestler. I qualified for our state tournament twice, but I never won a match in the state tournament. So I was a good wrestler. I wasn't a great wrestler. But when I walked on at Ohio State, my brother had walked on before me. It looked like a pretty good social group. It was a pretty wild bunch, and we had a lot of fun. But again, figuring out what's it take to succeed. I had to stop cutting weight. I had to get big. I had to get strong. I had to maintain the work ethic that I brought as a 177 pounder into the heavyweight weight class. And I was a heavyweight that wrestled a lot like a 177 pounder. And just got ridiculously strong. Like, when I was cutting to 177 as a freshman, my fifth year, my senior year, I walked on the mat at about 290 and about 12% body fat.
290?
Yeah, about 290 and about 12%. So I'm walking on the mat at about 255 pounds of lean mass, and strong. I mean, I had an 840 squat. I doubled 840 in the squat. I doubled 480 on the bench. I wasn't doing strength work. I was training to wrestle. So I was like, well, what was your 1 rep max? I'm like, never did a 1 rep max. So the routine said, do 2 of these. And again, my best double was 840 in the squat and 480 in the bench. But it's that process. Again, I'll go back to it. What is the weak link? What do you have to solve for? I have a friend that's a Stanford MBA, and he says there's this thing called constraint management. You figure out what the constraint is, you solve it, and you move on. So for me, I had to get healthy. I had to get strong, solve that. Technically, you had to solve that. So you keep solving for these things, which is all a process, but it's all very individual. And this is, what we see is this carries on today in life with longevity and every other thing in life. We're all, you are you, I am me. We have similar genetics. We're both white males, but we have different genetics because just how diverse this planet is. For you to be successful and for me to be successful, it may be a completely different pathway. Mm-hmm. And this is important for people to figure out. Just because Joe Bag of Donuts out here is doing X, Y, and Z doesn't mean it'll work for you. Right. You've got to become a student and own your existence in order to figure out what your weakness is, solve for it, and move on.
Absolutely. I really think people aren't even aware of what to look for in weaknesses when it comes to strength and conditioning. And maybe you could enlighten this for some people, because one of the biggest lessons I learned when I went from trying to program for myself, and I was just in kinesiology, I was just trying to learn this stuff, and I was like, how can I somehow make a weight a punch, basically. I'm like, just put weight into a punch. And then I finally learned it's like, it's way less about weighting your punch. It's more about balancing out your body, doing fundamental movement patterns. Like your deadlift, squat, and bench are going to apply to it if your body's balanced. And you actually got to do more of your non-sport specific stuff so you prevent your injuries. What are some like fundamental principles people should be thinking about when they think about strength and conditioning as an athlete to make it so they're looking properly at those weaknesses?
Well, I think there's two sides to that. We get obsessed with strength when we're doing strength and conditioning. So let me put this in perspective. When I was a sports scientist at Ohio State, we measured 3.5 million data points a season on a wrestling team. So one of the things that we would do is that on all their strength exercises, well, their major strength exercises like bench, squat, deadlift, the key stuff, we would always record their best reps, their best set. And we track that. So if the set 1 week is 185 for 2, the next week we would figure out what their new 1 rep max was, and we want to see that number moving all the time. So with that said, here's what we learned with elite college wrestlers, and these are guys that are All-American or better. Okay, this is who we were working with. Once they could deadlift 2.25 times their body weight, getting stronger in the deadlift didn't lead to any more success. If they could deadlift 2.5 times or 3 times, they saw no more success. But once they got to that 2.25, all of my All-Americans could deadlift 2.25 times their body weight. And guys that could only do 1.8, 1.7 usually couldn't get into that first group. So strength is important to a point, okay? Always identifying. Now, my history, I spent way too much time in the weight room. Okay. If I had to go back and redo it again, I would have changed some things. Knowing what I know now, I would have changed some things. I didn't need an 840 squat. I didn't need that. But you know what? At the time I was training with Louis Simmons, and this is what Lou did. So this is what we did. In retrospect, I would have probably spent a little less time in the weight room, a little bit more focused, a little bit more compressed. I mean, we had long lifting days because we were pushing big weight, so you needed to recover. And I'm not sure that we needed to invest that much time. I probably would have done a little better investing time in other aspects of my game. But you know what? Listen, I had a great career. Way outpaced anything I should have done. But it's always critical. Again, it's strength and conditioning. Okay. Right. There's two sides to that. So understanding that conditioning side, and now we should probably change the name to strength conditioning and recovery.
Right.
So understanding recovery is critical. And this was a huge listen. We did not have recovery. We were balls to the wall the whole time.
Yeah.
Athletically, socially, academically, we were 10 of 10 the whole time.
Yeah.
So learning to manage recovery on the backside of that process, putting key performance indicators in place. How strong is strong enough? Are my numbers moving the direction? If they're not moving, change something. So constantly monitoring and seeing feedback. And you know what? Listen, this is before personal computers. I'm old enough that, I didn't get my first personal computer until I was in grad school. So we were, this is one of the regrets I still have. I used to have 2 journals where I wrote down everything I did for 2 years in a row. Literally every workout, everything I did. And when I left the sport, I threw them away. And again, it's one of the only regrets I have. But that was our key performance piece. I would go back and review the journal. So building a library of what you do so that you can go back and review and make changes and do these things. I think that is probably as important a skill as any that someone can develop.
So key for people to appreciate that. You're the second well-experienced person I've had on here, my old boxing coach, who was By the way, similar, like great athlete, great success, 4-time national champ in boxing, 7-time national team member. And he's like, I wish I journaled. He says, I wish I just would have like sat down, recorded it. Another boxing coach said, you should be journaling. You should be like measuring it, because it's reminding you about the adventure that you're on. And we want to think that we're going to remember these really intense practices, or sometimes we just don't realize how important something simple is. But one of the things I want to come back to that you had mentioned there was about the it's not all about strength. And
Right.
so, and you mentioned Louis Simmons. So I was really want to hear about his influence on you in that way. And my assumption then would be, when you have someone, that, for example, who can't reach that mark that you said, you probably want them, that's their weakness, they want to reach that standard. When you have an athlete that is that strong, was the focus then maybe a little less strength but more speed work? Is that something that they were missing, or just more skill work in the sport?
What we found is it turned into muscular endurance.
Oh, okay.
Your ability. The last 2 years I was with the team, we broke the team into 3 groups. One group was an All-American or better. And this included Olympic medalists and national champions and All-Americans. Then I had a second group of athletes that had started for us but never made All-American. Okay, that was the second group. The third group, they never started for us. Okay, but these people all train together side by side. They're state champions in all groups. There's wonderful wrestlers. So trying to figure out what are the key things that separate those 3 groups. So where deadlifting selected for your ability to move from group 3 to group 2, okay, getting stronger in group 2 didn't move you to group 1. What moved you to group 1 was muscular endurance. So we would do a weighted weight hang. We would take their body weight, we would divide it in 2, put it in a dumbbell, and make them stand there and hold it as long as they could. So that was, and I think it's important to get the hands involved. In sport. But the other thing that we looked at, pull-ups and planks. One of my national titleists did a 21-minute plank.
Wow.
So, wow. and I'm not sure he couldn't have kept going, but it's that muscular endurance. So once you have the strength, actually, I'll tell you, I'll go back. I have a model that I work with on the physical side. The first thing you have to do is you have to be able to move. So you need all the joints, all the processes moving the right way. If you can't move a certain way, it's usually a strength limitation, and you fix it. And that might be micro strength. I mean, this is down to physical therapy kind of stuff, but you got to be able to move first. Once you can move, you add load. You add your ability to drive a force, to get a load in there. Once you can drive a load, you increase your ability to produce energy. So this is where the conditioning comes into play. Learning about lactate threshold and where to train so you can produce ATP, so you have energy to use throughout the event. And then finally, the top of that, the fourth side of that, is your ability to recover. So move, strength, energy, recover. That's how I rank that and how I work my way through that process. If I have an athlete hurt themselves, it doesn't do any good to condition or strength on a joint that can't move. Fix movement first, then add load, then add conditioning, then make sure you have recovery.
Well, I got to go back to your sentiment, and I hope that you both coin this term, that you owned it, strength conditioning recovery coach. I think that just has to come out. I think that would be beautiful if we start pushing this in the industry, because that's actually what you end up managing on some of these athletes, like wrestlers, and I know in boxers for myself, I'm like, you need to do less. You're doing so much. Ultimately,
and let me go one more step. Ultimately, I think we need sports scientists. Okay. So science is a process. We hypothesize what's it take to be a better athlete. We create experiments. Here's workouts to make you stronger. We have results from those experiences, and this is where most people stop. You need to then take those results and analyze them to see, do we move forward? Is it making a difference? This is the scientific process. Finishing the analysis that you do with the experiment and going up and refeeding the hypothesis. I think anyone who works in sport should be looking at this from a scientific standpoint. Your skill is to plug strength in, or to plug conditioning in, or plug training in, or nutrition, or psychology. Those are all tools in the toolbox. But ultimately, you want to be the person that's driving the scientific process, collecting the data, separating the signal from the noise. There's a lot of noise. Okay. You got to figure out what makes a difference. Bench pressing predicts nothing. It has an inverse relationship to success. The best bench pressers are not the best athletes. In fact, the best bench pressers are usually the worst athletes on the team. Okay. So we can't get hung up with classic strength and conditioning. Okay. Because you've got to be paying attention to the task at hand.
Yeah, I completely agree that people can be just so much about the weights. It's so often I saw in the gym where I'm like, wow, this guy can squat. This guy's so strong on the bench. And I talk to the people who go with him on the ice. I'm like, how's this guy on the ice? Like, he's a beast. He's like, yeah, he's kind of gangly on the ice, or he's not that smart of an athlete, or they're actually just too intense. And there's some guys who wanted to play pro so badly. They would go into the gym early, and they were playing pro hockey at the time, but they go to the gym early for like 45 minutes to do their own mobility that they've researched. Then they do our mobility, then they do their workout, and they're like, hey, can I do some conditioning after? And it's just like, then you hear about them on the ice, and they just, because they don't have that skill, it doesn't always apply, right? You should have almost been spending more time just working on the skill itself. But yeah, it's definitely something you see. Now, coming back, I just want to hear quickly, and then I want to jump into HRV, was just Louis Simmons. That's amazing. You have to work with a legendary Louis Simmons. What was his influence on you? What was that like?
Well, listen, Louis was a genius. I mean, it didn't take long. He was a lunchbox genius. I mean, this guy went to work during the day. He was a steel worker, came home. That was the funny thing about, when we first started squatting in his gym, his power rack, the poles were round, and he drilled holes through them. I mean, it wasn't like we're used to today. But he was a problem solver. He figured out that, wow, I need to shrink my pin heights, because there's a difference between a 3-inch pin placement and a 1-inch pin placement. So when it comes to strength, so genius when it comes to understanding physiological response to training. He was an absolute genius. Good guy. He was a good guy, had a good heart. Listen, and I don't know if have you seen the movie Westside versus the World? Yeah. Okay. So I was there when Matt Dimmel was there and those guys. I mean, listen, I had a 600 or 700 pound squat back then, and those guys are rolling through doing 1,000, 1,100 pound doubles. And it was like, what the hell? But you still learn. And again, it was pretty cool, because at the same time, I'm being influenced by the Nautilus Midwest group and the high intensity group and the high intensity training stuff. So we had Nebraska concept, and we had the high intensity guys coming out of the Washington Redskins and Penn State. And then we had the Louis Simmons's Westside theory, the conjugate theory. And so I'm just sitting back. Everybody, as I've taught over the years, it's been funny, because I'll have students saying, I'm a West Side guy, or I'm a HIT guy. And I said, listen, it's really important to notice that being a West Side guy or HIT guy, there's a difference between Methodists and Baptists, okay? You're reading the same damn book, okay? Now, you may like the Methodists or you may like the Baptists, but there's really not that big a difference, okay? So don't let your dogma affect what you're doing when you're teaching and coaching other people, because there's some people, and let me put this in perspective. One of the last 2 years I was with Ohio State, I had 3 strength coaches with that team. I had a strength coach that was supplied by the university. I had a strength coach that came through our Olympic Training Center, and my Olympic gold medalist, Kyle Snyder, had his own guy, and his guy was wanted to work. There was a couple other guys wanted to work with his guy. 3 completely different philosophies, completely different. Coaching staff came to me and said, what should we do? I said, let the guys pick their program. We track everything, but we let them pick. So that year we had 10 guys qualify for nationals. We qualified our whole starting lineup. The strength breakout was 3-3-4. 3 guys worked with one coach, 3 guys worked with another, 4 worked with the third. So as even a break as you can get with 10. We had 8 All-Americans, 2-2-3. Again, as even as a break. So what did I learn? It's not about Westside or that. It's about get the damn door open, get in and lift weights. What we learned is once you have absolute strength, focus on strength endurance, and then but just lift. Okay, just lift. And don't overcomplicate it. This stuff. And again, I all my guys, all three of those coaches, they were. Movement was a big part of what they taught. Okay. We had good movement skills built in all the exercises. We then added load. We then put conditioning and finally recovery. And that's how the whole process comes together.
I think that's beautiful. I think that really nails it down so well and super important for people to value, because so many people want to, what's the perfect program? Is it this guy? Oh, but this guy says this. Oh, but Louis Simmons is so renowned. And then, well, there's a lot of different ways to climb a mountain, or as they say, skin the cat. And right. I love that you had this approach. It's perfect because it's like people choosing diets. It's like, oh, which one works best? It's like, let them choose it. And one of the things they say in research when it comes to sustainable dieting, it's people who choose the diet that they're more likely to adhere to. It's not that, low carb or high carb is in any way superior. It's what the individual chooses that's super important. So you gave them that right. There probably isn't, there's even a chance, and you can tell me if this makes sense for your scenario, that there could be a personal relationship to those coaches. Was there any relationship that those guys had? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So they're just more comfortable with it.
More comfortable. And you know what, Ryland, I talk about the fact everyone talks about we evolve. Okay. Humans have not evolved in millions of years. Okay. Because you only evolve with extinction. Okay. You have to have extinction to have a subset evolve out of. In the absence of extinction, all you have is diversity. So we continue to diversify. So it's possible that you do better as a vegan and I as a carnivore, or vice versa.
Oh, definitely carnivore over here, just so you know.
Me too. If it doesn't have a face, I don't eat it.
I love it.
But that's the old farmer in us, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's possible that someone does better on a vegan or a vegetarian, vegan, or fill in the blank, because of the diversity. Okay. And again, this is what's so important for you as an individual, to establish sets of KPIs that you use to, am I moving this ball forward?
Right. Yeah. KPIs are big. And just to keep that simplicity to it, sometimes we just need the simple approach, not the perfect approach, the most important one. And it's the most redundant statement in fitness. Consistency is key. But if you can just put this to scale, that if you were to program hop between 5 different programs over the course of a year, you could do one okay program consistently all year, and you'll end up getting better results. Because, if you're going, this, and then you're kind of out of it, or you go really hard on this and you're kind of out of it. But if you just had one pretty good program, like decent program, you're going to get better results because you just keep showing up.
Yeah, and again, I think you have to program against a goal.
Right.
I do a talk on both longevity and performance. I talk about my 5 rocks in the jar, my 4 rocks in the jar. So whether it's sport performance or longevity, I think the number 1 rock in the jar is movement. Okay. You have to exercise. Okay. You have to exercise, and there's hacks for that. This is where blood flow restriction comes into play, and sauna and cold. There's lots of ways to stress that movement rock. That you just have to figure out what works for you. Number 2, you need nutrient dense food. In the absence of nutrients, and I'm talking, and the older I get, the less I think about proteins, fats, and carbs, and the more I think about micronutrients. When you start looking at vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, things like that, we're learning more and more every day. That's why I work for a company called Longevity Labs, and we sell a product called Spermidine Life. There's this molecule called spermidine that's critical in what's called the autophagy pathway that leads to a good long life. Okay, so nutrient-dense food. Number 3, you need sleep. Okay. In the absence of sleep, you don't get better. You can't hack sleep. You can hack the sleep environment, okay, and you can do things, but sleep is critical. And for so long, we've had this kind of agenda that I'm strong, I don't need to sleep, I got work to do. That's bullshit. Okay, in fact, I go back to, I was working with some special operations groups when we were at Ohio State. They're at a crossover, and there was a SEAL team that did this experiment where they sleep deprived these warriors, and then they had them judge their performance in an operation. Simultaneously, they had a group judging their performance too, and they compared the evaluations. Well, the SEAL team that was sleep deprived, they thought their performance was great. Well, the guys evaluated said, no, you guys sucked. Okay. So in the absence of sleep, you lose that perspective. Okay. And so sleep is critical. And then finally, the fourth rock is what I call light. Light is critical. Light on the skin is critical. And there's also toxic light. Blue lights at night that's disturbing your circadian rhythm. That's affecting your sleep. Okay, so those are my four rocks. Movement, you hack with exercise. Nutrition, food, you hack with nutrients. Sleep, you hack the environment. And then finally, light. How does light work? When do I get blue light into my eyes? When do I get near infrared light into my life? But these all go into the jar of what I call purpose. Okay, you have to have a purpose. You have to have a goal, because everything that we do is dragging us away from movement. It's dragging us away from nutrient-dense food. The society that we live in is pulling us away from sleep. It's pulling us away from light. So you have to have a strong purpose to constantly refocus on those four big rocks. Now, there's other things. And again, this goes back. I got this model from Stephen Covey. He has a book called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I really recommend.
Great book.
And they talk about the rocks in the jar. If you don't get the big rocks in first, and you get the gravel and the sand in around it, you'll never get the big. You got to get the big rocks in, and don't get focused on the sand and gravel. Focus on the big rocks. This applies to whether you're an athlete trying to win a high school state championship, or just make varsity, or whatever your goal is, all the way up to that athlete's grandparents who are trying to live a good long life and stay out of the hospital and stay off of tubes and live the third of their life in a manner that is fulfilling. Ryan, it's funny. I consider life in 3 stages. You spend the first third of your life learning, and you spend the second third of your life in service to others, either working as a family, working a job, things like that. Well, when my daughter moved out of our house 2 years ago, my wife and we started our third. It's our third, okay? Yeah. And we're making decisions based on us. Mm-hmm. So at this point, my long-term goals, listen, I've coached amazing kids, Olympic medalists, professionals, great. My favorite coaching job ever was my daughter's 8th grade field hockey team. Okay.
That's awesome.
Without a doubt, the greatest coaching experience I ever had. I want to coach my grandkids and my great-grandkids. About 6 years ago now, I had the opportunity to go back and work out. My nephew had qualified for the Florida State high school wrestling tournament. He was a heavyweight, big kid, 280 pounds like me. And he had qualified, and I got to go back and work out with him for a couple of days. First day, I'm still pretty good. I got a lot of tricks in my pocket and did all right. Second day was a freaking disaster. I had things popping. Just walking into the wrestling room, I had things popping. Yeah. I had no recovery. But I want to be the 80-year-old who can still teach wrestling.
I love that.
That's my focus. That's what drives it. I want to spend the rest of my life with my wife exploring wonderful places. That's why we do what we do. So whether I'm training to try and win a Big Ten title in wrestling, or I'm training to be the great-grandfather of a Big Ten winner, the process is very similar.
I love that. And I really appreciate those big rocks. I have one more rock for you that I actually just recently have been appealing to, because whenever I talk about training and nutrition, I always tell people, because they're like, oh, it's all in the kitchen. It's like, no, it's sleep, exercise, and training. Like, it's all 3. When it comes to the portion, how it affects you, it's all like 3 ways. But then like you added the light in there, which I think is very valuable. But the one that actually has been appealing to me, and you ended up talking about it constantly, and I heard that as far as longevity research for living longer, one of the most important things is relationships. So when you actually think about it, and you almost want to say mental health, but if you just even put the rock in your life that is relationships, it is your mental health, because as much as you do all these other things, that is for you, you make sure that your relationships are strong, and it'll motivate your mental health excellently. So I just wanted to share that with you, because I appreciate all the other things you said, because you said the most valuable experience was.
See, I don't see relationships as a rock. I see it as a KPI.
Okay.
I see it as what comes from investing in those other five.
Okay.
And you're in a position, but listen, this is semantics, and I don't want to.
Yeah. No, I get you.
And listen, when you read blue zones, or you look at what people who age well, absolutely, relationships are critical.
Yeah, for sure. And I wanted to keep talking about recovery. So let's dive into the HRV a little bit, because you got to work with Polar, and I'm super fascinated with it, because it's something I only mildly really get a chance to pay attention to. And what should people really be using? What do you recommend? What are some insights that people can actually start to, use biofeedback for? Like, it could be a wrist-worn watch or something like that. How do we use HRV?
Well, so let's talk about HR and HRV. Let's talk about heart rate and heart rate variability. And Rylan, I don't know the answer to this question. If I did, I would have solved this a long time ago. I don't know how you train without a heart rate monitor. Okay. I don't know how you do it.
Fair.
There is so much efficiency that comes with understanding zones, applying the zones to your goal, working towards that. I think when you decide to exercise, the first thing you need to decide is where am I going to get my heart rate data from? And whether it comes from an Apple Watch or a wrist wearable or something like that, there's tons of answers there. Okay. I used to work for Polar. 30 years ago, we were telling this story. We still didn't get it connected. I still see so many people training and just burying themselves. And I'm like, you have so much wasted energy there that could have been directed somewhere else. Going back to these efficiencies, because I look at exercise as economics, not physiology. It's, if I'm going to make an investment, where am I going to get my greatest return? Okay. Who takes and just pours money down an investment that you get nothing back from? Well, that's zone 4 work. Okay. When it comes right down to it, that's zone 4 work.
Yeah. The lactic threshold stuff.
Yeah. So this is number one. But number two, as I look at key performance indicators, here's what we know about HRV, heart rate variability. It's a measurement of your stress system. It's a measurement of whether you have resources or not. My Olympians have nighttime resting HRVs of greater than 100. Okay.
Wow.
When you die, your HRV will be 0. Okay. We're all in between those two. Okay. And the better job you do of exercise, of nutrient-dense food consumption, of sleep and light, the better your HRV will respond. I look at HRV as the key performance indicator. Okay. This is the thing to look at. And you can move it. It's not quick. It takes time. You got to do some work on this. But in my mind, and I'm looking forward to the day when I go into my doctor and he reviews my HRV data and perhaps my continuous glucose monitor data, and perhaps, it's not going to be long. I actually have down here in my drawer, I have a continuous ketone monitor.
Wow.
We're going to have a continuous insulin monitor relatively soon. We're starting to get to where we can measure things like blood pressures and things like that with wearable technology. We're at the verge of medicine 3.0. There's a great Canadian doctor. His name's Peter Attia. His book Outlive. I love his medicine 3.0. It's looking at and in my mind, HRV is the key performance indicator. And you're constantly trying to move that. I've personally been able to move mine from very low. I had a knee surgery almost 3 years ago that I got a MRSA infection from, and I was very ill for close to 2 months. In bed, 6 Percocets a day. It was rough. And coming out of that, I had nighttime resting HRVs in the teens. Okay. That's too close to zero for me.
That's very close.
Over time, I've slowly worked that up to where now I'm in the 50s. Okay. What we know from my wrestling team, if you want to be an All-American, you got to have a 75 or better to make All-American. My Olympians are in the hundreds. So this is one of the things when you start looking at, okay, what are tools that we can use to measure, am I making progress? You know, like I said, I pay pretty close attention to that nighttime resting HRV for me and making sure I'm doing the things I need to get that number up. And that's what led us to create our product. You know, we created a product that's called HRV Plus, which is a cannabis. It's CBD, CBDA, beta-caryophyllene in a fish oil, DHA, EPA, omega-3 fish oil with what's called SPM, specialized pro-resolving mediators. These are anti-inflammatory molecules. The number one driver of poor HRV is inflammation.
Right.
The number one driver of what's going to kill you after you're 45 years old is inflammation.
Right.
Okay. The relationship is perfect. Okay. So as you lower inflammation, you raise HRV. As you improve fitness, you lower inflammation, you raise HRV. As you improve fitness, you lower inflammation, you improve autophagy. This is a term that we have to understand autophagy if you want to age well. Spermidine is a key molecule in that process. So in the absence of spermidine, you have a drop of autophagy, you have an increase of inflammation. So all of these things are going hand in hand and critical. But to go back and answer your original question, the two things that my three key performance indicators personally, as a 61-year-old guy that's just working his way into his third, I look at nighttime resting HRV. I like to pay attention to watts per heartbeat. When I climb on a piece of equipment and I start to exercise, what is my heart rate compared to my wattage? As I get more fit, I can do more watts with less heartbeats. Okay, so to me, that's a KPI.
That's great.
And a version of that is nighttime resting heart rate. So your resting heart rate at night is a version of that. Your wattage is basically zero. It's whatever it takes for you to live. Okay, so nighttime resting heart rate, those are the three things I pay really close attention to.
That's really good KPIs to look at. I think that's really helpful. And you're inspiring me to make sure I get I had a Fitbit for a while and then I broke it. So I want to get my back because it's so helpful. I think it's so great to have simple indications there. And, you know, let's evolve this into the autophagy discussion because you're aging. So you're getting more interested in what it is about performance in life at this point, and that's aging. Right. So why don't you define, because a lot of people don't know what autophagy is. Define autophagy. What's the importance of autophagy?
So autophagy is an internal cellular cleaning process. So when our cells are healthy and we have nutrients on board, we have proteins in our cells that say, hey, there's nutrients, let's be a cell and make stuff, okay? Let's either make proteins or make more cells or do whatever. Not all of those production byproducts are correct. Not all the proteins your cells make are correct. And if they get stuck in the cell, if that protein can't go into the system and go into function, it just sits in that cell. Think tau proteins with Alzheimer's disease. This is the buildup of proteins in neurological cells that are not getting cleaned out. Autophagy is the process of cleaning those cells. So this is typically done. We typically associate autophagy with fasting. Mm-hmm. Okay. When my second rock, nutrients, okay, consumption of time of your nutrients is an important part of that rock. Instead of eating daylight to dark, eating on a 16-8, 18-6, whatever the pattern is, whatever your fasting routine is, it's an important routine to support autophagy because autophagy cleans those cells. We have the COVID epidemic that we had to deal with. We know COVID interferes with the autophagy process. It overstimulates the beginning and it blocks the end. We know we have a study out of Berlin that showed human immune cells that were supplemented with spermidine stopped COVID transmission 85, 90, 92% of the time.
Wow.
And if you think about the people who struggle with COVID, they have comorbidities.
Yeah.
They're diabetic. They don't exercise. They're overweight. Okay. These are all autophagy blunting conditions.
Right.
You solve them with exercise, nutrient-dense food, good sleep, and light. So this is where that goes back to. So autophagy is what we're finding when we look at what kills you after you're 45 years old. They're inflammatory-related diseases, cardiovascular disease, cancer, immune responses, neurological diseases. This is what's going to take you out. And if you want to live a long time, have good health span with lifespan, you've got to do all you can to keep that autophagy upregulated. So again, the other product that we have in our company, it's called Spermidine Life, there's a researcher in Austria, and this is very state-of-the-art, Rylan, that we just gave a Nobel Prize in 2016 to a researcher that fully described the genetic triggers in autophagy. That's how state-of-the-art this is. We're not 10 years past the Nobel Prize on this. And the Dr. Frank Medeo at the University of Graz in Austria started looking at this molecule spermidine on senescent cells. These are cells that are no longer, they're alive but not functioning correctly. And what he found is that when you stimulate it, it upregulates autophagy, the cell returns to normal. Okay? So we don't have to just clean out our senescent cells, but we can return them to normal with good autophagy. So again, going back to autophagy is critical to long life that's not in a hospital hooked to tubes. Okay.
Right.
And I don't know how I'm going to go. I hope I'm falling off the edge of the Grand Canyon when I'm 100 or something like that, or step in front of a bus at the wrong time. But I don't want to go in a hospital.
Right.
I have a good friend that says, I want to be happy, 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 dead.
Yes.
But how do you get that happy? Autophagy. You got to be driving that late in life.
Yeah.
We know it declines with age. We know spermidine levels decline with age. We know that as you support spermidine levels orally, as you consume this, it increases autophagy.
So am I to understand that spermidine, the molecule, is a naturally occurring molecule within the body, and you're upregulating it?
That's all it is. That's all it is. And when you look at, you've probably heard of blue zones. These are 5 areas around the world where people routinely live to 90 to 100 years old. Yeah. When you look at their diets, they're spermidine rich. Okay. They raise their own food. The challenge we have is our food is coming from an industrial production system that is not looking at micronutrients. It's only looking at macronutrients. So we have to go back. We think spermidine will be an essential nutrient. We'll treat it as a vitamin someday.
Oh, that's really cool.
It's a critical molecule. We're still early on this, but yeah, that autophagy, thinking about what am I doing in my life? Exercise drives autophagy. Nutrients in your food drive autophagy. Limiting the amount of time that you take in calories drives autophagy. Sleep is the ultimate fasting.
Yeah, that's when it happens, for sure.
Okay. And light on the skin is also an autophagy trigger.
Right.
So it all goes hand in hand. It all goes back to that process.
So what I'm really interested is some of the research on this. What was the research studies that you've seen? What was it compared to? Because one of the big things that I know that gets kind of, I want to say, blown out of the water from what I've understood is that autophagy is super important and super valuable, but it is in fasting gets more credit than just a regular calorie deficit. I haven't seen any research that compares a regular standard calorie deficit to the calorie deficit of fasting. It's the same net autophagy. So would then
Walter Longo at USC has got this work. What he was able to show is that if you take X number of calories, regardless of their quality, and you compress the consumption time, there is an upregulation of autophagy. Okay.
In comparison to the calorie deficit.
Well, and again, whether I don't even have to do a calorie deficit, I just have to compress the time I consume. Okay.
Right. I guess I would have to see the research, because my understanding, haven't dug into it, is that if you have that kind of eating window, and if the calories were equated in the calorie in it being a calorie deficit, is my point, is like you can get, like, you could eat all day, and as long as it's a net deficit, you're getting the same net autophagy.
The problem is with signaling. Okay, so you're going to get, so in the cell, if you have again, when I eat a carbohydrate or when I eat a protein, a carbohydrate triggers an insulin release, and a protein releases insulin-like growth hormone. So IGF, insulin or IGF. When there's insulin or IGF present, mTOR is active. Okay, so I want to shut down mTOR for a little bit. Okay, so when I remove insulin and I remove IGF, and I don't have mTOR firing, I start to get the upregulation of autophagy. This is the reason that you want to compress that into a window. Now, if you're trying to gain weight, if you're a high school football player and you're trying to put weight on, you know what? Knock yourself out peanut butter and jelly sandwiches every 2 hours. You want to feed that mTOR like crazy. Yeah. But if you're that parent, if you're that kid's parent or grandparent, you want to get that peanut butter and jelly into a 6-hour window.
Right. Okay. I think that's really
the signaling. It's the cellular signaling. It's at the cell level. It's not at the organism level. It's down at the cell level.
I guess I would just really love to be fascinated to see the research. And if this spermidine is super promising as it sounds, again, my one understanding was that I hadn't seen research that compares a standard calorie deficit that does have meals throughout the day to windowed eating, whatever the window is, and it seems that it's same net autophagy. But if you had spermidine, could that upregulate it from the calorie deficit itself? Because I think one of the things that even some people who do window eat and are in that window, they'll still overconsume calories. And I know this because I'll do it, because I'm a binge eater at heart. So it doesn't matter if I window eat. So it's like, if you give me 4 hours to eat, I'll eat 4,000 calories. It's just like, as long as I'm not doing, like you say, the high quality foods and stuff.
And this is what Valter's work, this is what Dr. Longo's work shows. And so this is where you go look for that. He's done a good job. He's at USC. He's the inventor of the fasting imitation diet. So he's done a lot of work in that space, and he's got the research on this.
Okay, I'll look it up, Victor Longo. That's great. Well, I think you've really enlightened me on that, and I'm going to definitely research more of the spermidine, and you inspired me to get back on the HRV. I love all the conversation we had about strength conditioning. I talked to you for hours about that. But what I'd love to know, to wrap up here, is what is, it's probably to do with your traveling, but I want to know what's your most recent ambition. What are you really excited about coming down the pipeline?
You know what's funny about that is that I've kind of been looking for something. I've been looking for what's my next gig, you know? Mm-hmm. And I was recording a podcast. So right now we're in the Pacific Northwest. I was down in Seattle the other day recording a podcast, and my grandfather's picture, my grandfather was a police officer on the railroad, and he had marksmanship trophies. And so I was at my uncle's house, and he had these marksmanship trophies. And I said to my wife, I said, you know what? I think I'm going to set a goal of earning a trophy in marksmanship. So it's either going to be that. I think that's kind of where I'm going to start to focus on.
Yeah.
I do want to get back to skiing. I've not skied in 3 years since that knee surgery, but I do have my boots in the rig. I just have to buy boards to go on the bottom of them.
Okay.
But I want to get back skiing this year. I'm looking forward to that. But to go back and answer your question, this was relative. This just happened the other day. I was like, again, I'm doing a podcast, like I'm looking at you. I'm looking over my shoulder in the image, and I see the image of my grandfather. I thought, that would be pretty cool. That'd make my grandpa happy.
I love that. And it just goes to show how you've had so much success that you're like, what's my next big mountain? And it's so important that we have these journeys that just, like, I had the same thought when I was in the middle of a hockey game the other day. I'm like, man, I did a bodybuilding show just this last spring. Mm-hmm. It was successful. And not having that pursuit, that thing that takes you outside of your job and everything. You're doing this for yourself. You're doing this challenge, this difficult thing, to own the process, like you say, but to create something out of yourself. It's a beautiful thing. I love hearing that. So why don't you tell the audience where they find more about you, more about Spermidine and all of your products?
So if you want to learn about me, the best place to go find out about me is at my LinkedIn page. So LinkedIn, Don Moxley, it'll come up. If you want to learn about Spermidine, go to Spermidine Life, www.spermidinelife, spermidinelife.us. That's our North American Spermidine. If you want to learn about HRV, go to www.modemethod, modemethod.com. That's where you'll learn about HRV plus, and why don't we create a 15% discount on both those products for your listeners?
That's
so
great.
What do you think? Let's call the code SA15, and if someone wants to try it, use SA15 and save a little bit of money.
That's perfect. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. I'm certain my listeners will appreciate that too. They should definitely dive into it. I'm interested in both those products. So it was an honor to have you on here. I really appreciate all your great knowledge. I might reach out to you again just to talk strength conditioning because I think you got so much knowledge to share with us.
Listen, you can reach out and we'll talk strength anytime you want.
I love it. Thanks so much, Don. Thanks so much to Don Moxley. I really enjoyed that conversation. I could have chatted with him forever about strength conditioning. He has a lot of knowledge. And if you're unaware, Louis Simmons is probably one of the most important influences on powerlifting in the world ever. He was a legendary, and he had mentioned about the documentary Westside versus the World. If you have not watched it, go watch it immediately. I actually recommend you watch it while you're weightlifting because that's what I did. And man, that fired me up. But you get to hear about a tremendous story, and the guy was a genius. He even invented the reverse hyper. And to just hear all of Don's experience in it and how he had said there's so many different ways to apply this. It's not just the Westside Barbell style. There's so many different styles that can get you the net result. And I love his simplicity of system. Like, make sure you have a movement pattern is what he's really talking about. Joint accessibility. Can you actually move in the range of motion that you need? And then you load the range of motion you need. And then he's mentioned conditioning capacity, be able to do it fast and for a high amount. And he talks about muscular endurance, which I think is really helpful for me as a strength coach to start to think about, okay, actually, I pay attention a lot to the strength side. I pay attention a lot to intensity and speed, but I need to apply more to strength endurance. And I just have not done that as much. So I think it's super valuable. And how he had coined, I give him credit because I want this to be coined strength conditioning recovery coach, because people don't realize that you need to recover for anything to matter. So that was super valuable. And for him to really appeal to the promising usefulness of HRV, that is something that I know I got to get back on. I used to have my Fitbit just kind of messed up, got some super glue stuck on it, so I couldn't charge it. But that's a lazy excuse to not fix it, because it was super insightful. When I started my bodybuilding prep, I was doing around 8 to 10K steps just routinely in the winter. And I think I was probably also having a decent amount of caffeine. So my resting heart rate was actually a little bit higher than I would personally wanted. I was doing a ton of strength training. I was training 6 days a week, and I would take an extra day off if I had to. But I got in strength shape. I got a lot of muscle mass, but I noticed my heart rate, the resting heart rate was higher. And then when I started to just do walking, I just walked the dogs a bunch when I did my prep, and I had to do 14K steps a day. And then my resting heart rate went down like right away. I knew I was in better shape aerobically just from walking more, not even doing high intensity interval training, just from walking more. So that's insight that you actually want. And he's inspired me to really start to apply this more with my athletes. I try to get them to use intuitive measures, and if they have a heart rate monitor, but I'm going to probably be pushing them to get more, because he's right. It's just like a waste of energy if you're not doing the right intensity at the right time. So I think it's super valuable. And I'm really interested in this Spermidine product, as I didn't realize that it was a natural product that you're just upregulating. So I think there's something really promising there. I will say I don't know if I fully agree with the fasting, but I have to do my own research because I listen to people discuss research. And so I don't always do the research. So he has, inspired me to go look up Victor elongate, the Victor, the guy he had referenced, and to look into these studies to see how big of a difference it makes. And I think it's super valuable when you're looking at your longevity, how you can improve it. But I'll say he'll probably agree with this. And he did talk about nutrient density is super important. That all of those things about inflammation, I didn't point it out in the episode because I wanted to ask more questions, but when people get caught up in inflammation, it's super important that you understand that inflammation caused by what? It's not just, don't get afraid of the word inflammation, get concerned about inflammation resulting from XYZ. So if you get mad at inflammation, it's like getting mad at an ambulance for showing up at the scene of a car accident. It has to show up because there's a car accident. You don't say an ambulance caused a car accident. But what he's pointing out here is, why do these ambulances show up? He had talked about cancer. He talked about obesity, comorbidities, high blood pressure. These are the reasons why the ambulance is showing up, and we want to reduce that. We want to prevent the reason for the ambulance to show up. So inflammation is a really negative thing as a result of the things that's driving it forward. So what I think we would both agree with is that you should have the right amount of calories or be in a calorie deficit resulting from whatever windowed eating pattern that you're doing in order to get your autophagy that you want. So again, I even personally, before I say I know for sure, I want to do my own research, but I'd be really interested if this is as promising as he sounds, that if you do, whether it be windowed eating or maybe just a regular standard calorie deficit, maybe also utilizing spermidine along with it could actually heighten it that much more. So I think that's really exciting to know that we could be pushing that much more. As he had mentioned, we all want to be in our 80s, 90s, whatever, and go out swinging, go out having fun, happy, happy, happy dead. That's the right way to go. So I think that's a beautiful message for everyone to really aspire to. I hope you learned a lot from this episode, because I know, again, I actually did. I generally think I'm going to look at my training a little bit different for my clients, get into the HRV, and I hope you do too, because that's what this is all about. It's about helping us figuring out our own pursuits and to, just like he had said, go after that new mountain. So I hope this helps you with that. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe, leave a review if you really enjoy this podcast. And if you know someone, another athlete that might like it, please share it with them, because that's the best way for me to spread this message. And just once again, thank you for listening, because I appreciate you taking your time and allowing me to help you with your own pursuit. Because life is not about the pursuit of happiness, but rather the happiness within your pursuit. And I'll catch you next time.